Everyone was talking about the amazing image quality and specs of the GH6, and I totally agree that its features really shook the market. But I have some bad news, and I was very surprised how almost no one mentioned the obvious problem with its sensor that would erase all this awesomeness. I'm shooting this with the GH6, and what you're seeing here is what I'm talking about. I'm not shooting anamorphic or using any filter effects. This is the sensor that's unable to deal with the bright light sources. While Panasonic tried to fix it with a couple of firmware updates, till the date of this episode, the result you just saw is the best they could do. So in this episode, I'll go beyond the hype and get a bit technical as usual. I'll share the details about the streaking phenomena that no one else shared with you. I'll also show you test footage and comparison against other popular cameras. All for you to be fully aware of the problem before you buy the camera and discover it the hard way. Just to be fair, I only found 2 trusted YouTubers that talk about this issue, Gerald Undone and CVP. Their technical knowledge combined with their honesty and objective opinions are the reasons why I follow their channels. The only problem is they barely glanced over the issue and didn't give it the attention I believe it deserved. And that's why this episode is about taking a deeper dive in this topic. So Panasonic sent the camera over a month before the official release, and this is literally the very first video test I took with the camera right out of the box. I was casually testing the new dynamic range boost feature by shooting in vlog a very high dynamic range shot. The typical window shot where the outside is probably 6 to 7 stops higher than inside. This is the shot with the boost on, and here's the one with the boost off. I don't really need to point the obvious streaking happening from the window to the sides of the frame. It's more obvious in shots with boost off, and a bit more subtle with the one with the boost on. This light streak is a horizontal projection of the strong highlights against darker background. It's also more obvious on solid backgrounds, and when the light source has more defined edges like the window here, which might explain why you might have not noticed them much in your camera. So I reported the issue to Panasonic, and they said they'll work on a solution in the next update prior to release. Nothing strange here so far, considering this was a beta firmware and bugs were expected. At that point, all plans for my camera review were put on hold, as I was waiting for Panasonic's update to properly test it. It just didn't make sense for me to talk about the awesomeness of the camera before addressing this issue. Fast forward a month since my first test, and 2 firmware updates later, we reached firmware 1.0, which is the official version that will ship with the camera when you get your hands on it. I expected this to be the version that would fix the problem once and for all. So get ready for some good news and bad news. I shot another scene. At first glance, the footage with boost off at ISO 1000 looks promising. You can still see the streaks, but it's definitely better. Now I add the LUT. Still looks good. But as I increase the contrast, something you probably do as you're grading the footage, it started popping up more. It looks like a shadow streak, not a light streak running across the image next to the window as you can see. Let's remove all effects. Then let's see ISO 1250. Did you notice that? The streak reversed and became a light streak and the whole image was darker. At this point, things are in an acceptable range. But after that, it's all bad news. At ISO 2000, it reversed back. It's a shadow streak again, and the whole image is lifted. It's looking worse now. Let's toggle between 1250 and 2000. You can see the big impact one ISO click can have. Now with LUT applied, you can still see it. And here it is with some contrast. I mean, I'll let you judge what we're seeing here. Then if we jump to 8000, we see some horizontal color smudging as well. Again, when I toggle between this and the 2000, you can see what's going on. That gets worse all the way up to 12800. I mean, at this point, it's obvious those inconsistencies every time we change the ISO are almost impossible to deal with in post when grading, or even keep track of while shooting to avoid them. Now when you turn on the dynamic range boost, starting at 2000, the streaking is in the acceptable range. Not as good as when the DR boost is off at 1000, but still looks okay. Adding the LUT will kind of hide it, but the S-curve brings it back a bit as expected. It stays like that till we reach 4000, where bad news starts. Here it is with the LUT and with the S-curve. And it just gets even worse the higher you go, all the way up to 12800, where noise is king. With all that said, let's all agree on a couple of important notes. The GH6 is awesome in many ways. I'm not here to trash talk this camera. I'm only here to report what I saw and what I'll do about it. I was in fact so impressed with its set of specs and features that I literally have 2 more episodes that will cover all those features in details. I didn't care if I missed publishing them on the release day and just felt I'd rather give Panasonic a chance to fix the issues before sharing my thoughts on everything else. But I directly asked Panasonic about this and they confirmed that they are okay with the problem as is, and they're comfortable to start shipping the camera, which was kind of shocking to me honestly. I always knew Panasonic to be more conscious about the quality of their products, but that's not really the case here unfortunately. Second, I'm pretty much aware how cameras in the final testing phases would still be full of bugs because their beta firmwares are not fully cooked yet, and reporting those bugs is part of the reason why companies send those cameras to beta testers. I literally tested the GH series going all the way back to the GH3. But all those bugs are usually fixed before the official public release of the final firmware 1.0, which is usually quality controlled and has Panasonic's blessings and stamp of approval. But the samples I showed you here are all shot in the 1.0 firmware, the same one being shipped with the cameras now. Last and most important point, this light streaking issue is not unique to the GH6. It's a phenomenon that affects all CMOS sensors unfortunately. Just to give you a quick and oversimplified idea on what's happening here, let's have a closer look at the sensor on a pixel level. When this photosite or pixel gets overcharged by excessive amount of light coming in, which is the window in our case, the extra charge ends up leaking into the neighboring pixels that have lower charge, which were represented by the darker background we have. And this overflow of charge cascades all the way down to the neighboring pixels, which ends up causing the streak. But as mentioned, each sensor expresses it at different levels, some more than others, and some did a great job in fully mitigating it to an imperceivable level, which I'm about to show you now. So I replicated this test with those cameras to confirm how good or bad the streaking issue is in the GH6. And it wasn't looking good. So let's start with the closest relative, the GH5. At ISO 1000 for example, it looks pretty clean, similar to ISO 1000 in the GH6, which is the cleanest we got from it so far. Let's add a LUT and stress test it with some contrast. Now you can see the GH6 expresses some streaking. To be fair, it's an acceptable level, while the GH5 is standing strong. And here's ISO 2000 in the GH5, which actually stays consistently clean from now on. And the GH6, and streaking. Toggling between them, you can see the drama in the GH6. Side by side, with LUT, and some contrast. It'll keep on getting worse for the GH6 from now on, as we saw already. Here's the 2500 for example, with the LUT, and with contrast. Moving on to its second relative, the S1H. Using the low gain ISO at 640, I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's a very subtle streaking happening, way below the visible level. Let's compare that to the cleanest setting in the GH6 at ISO 640, and there you go. The GH6 looks bad already. Here they are side by side. When I add a LUT, the streaking in the S1H pretty much disappears. Then let's add some contrast. It's still clean, while the GH6 already broke down and you can see the streaking. Again, this is the cleanest setting in the GH6. But the streaking starts showing in the S1H at 1600, along with some warm color shift. But it's not half as bad as in the GH6 that starts streaking badly at 2000. Now if we go to the high ISO setting in the S1H, starting at 4000, it looks pretty clean, with the LUT, even when I add contrast, while the GH6 at 4000 is bad in both modes with DR boost on and off. Here's with the LUT, and with contrast. Not sure which one looks worse. They're just the reverse of each other. One is streaking shadow and the other is streaking light. But streaking comes back in the S1H at 8000 and pretty much stays consistent all the way up, which is similar to the GH6 that has a bit of a murky color shift in both DR boost off and on. Here they are side by side, now with the LUT and some contrast. Moving on to the Pocket 6K Pro, I was surprised to see that the low ISO setting of 400 and up to 1000 expressed some bad streaking, almost identical to ISO 2000 on the GH6, which will force me to completely avoid shooting in those ISOs in the Blackmagic. But once you hit 1250, the second native ISO setting, you get a super clean image all the way up, even when you add a LUT and contrast, beating the GH6 at its cleanest setting in both DR boost on and off. As for the FX3, it's pretty simple. At ISO 640, it looks pretty clean, even when I add a LUT, but only when I add contrast, we can start seeing very subtle streaking, way below visible level. Then the camera stays pretty clean from 1250 and all the way up, and even at the second native ISO of 12800, we still get a clean image. So good job, Sony. Finally, to compare this to industry standard cinema cameras like the new Red V Raptor, it's pretty much what you expect from a $30,000 camera. A pure clean image that doesn't suffer from any streaking at any ISO whatsoever. Whether you add a LUT or even contrast, the image is super clean. There's a reason why you pay that much after all.
At this point, unlike other cameras, there's pretty much no escape from the light streaks at any setting, which makes me think, what's the point of having the awesome feature of dynamic range boost when the camera breaks down when shooting a basic high dynamic range shot? So it's pretty much up to you whether you'd be okay with having those light streaks smearing all your shots, or you'd rather hold back and hope Panasonic would soon find a solution for it. Unless they fix this issue, I personally have no plans of buying the GH6 or using it in any of my shoots. I'm not ready to deal with angry clients complaining about unfixable footage. So if you already bought the camera, please test it out yourself and share your feedback in the comments below, and let me know if it makes sense for me to finish my review of the camera regardless of this issue. Hope you found this episode useful. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.